Let's see if I can make it right. Okay. If you're here, beautiful, watching me, and that's you, I love you. I'm assuming that's my L. I have not gone live on TikTok yet. I'm just on YouTube so far. Um, Let me get everything set up. That's not what I wanted. Just not what I wanted. Subscription. I hope you're having a beautiful night. I love you so much. I hope you're driving safe in your beautiful new vehicle. I had a pretty good day, but it was also a lot, which I would love to talk to you about tonight. Trying to get all of this up so that I can get the TikTok going. And this is going to be my last on this subject. And so I want to make sure that everything is up and correct. Maybe it's not my L watching me, but if it is, let me get Michael. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Trying to make sure everything is set up. So what I wanted to do. That's what I want. That is not what I want. They change these live goals on me all the time, and I would much rather have things like finger hearts than like $100. Hello, hello, hello. Oh, yay. Thank you. Thank you. I went all out to put on to make them up. I painted me face. It painted me face. This is going to be our last live on this set of subjects. And then starting Friday mornings live, we are going to move on to studying on the Neanderthals specifically for a couple of weeks. The first subjects that we're going to be studying with on the Neanderthals are going to be the different species that we see through genomes. Thank you for telling me. The different species that we're seeing through genomes. I hope that worked for minutes better. And and language. We're going to discuss language, and we're going to discuss the Neanderthal species and the different species within them. Oh, myself, me. There, I try not to block the face, and the comments will go off in a minute anyways. So, but we're going to look specifically to start off with what the genome tells us about the Neanderthal species and other species at the time. And then we're going to look at language and the presence of language in Neanderthal and how we're able to talk about and tell those things. After that, we're going to go into a few other subjects and conversations. Neanderthals are actually a very broad range of subjects and very broad conversation. And so, what we're going to do is make sure we take about 3 or 4 weeks to just kind of cover Neanderthal and cover different in depth focuses of Neanderthal. So, this will be our last live on this subject. I was just going to turn comments off eventually. So, I was just ignoring Bruce, the goose, who is very obviously a goose. Don't think I can add any more moderators because I'm at 30, and that's like the max that you're allowed to have. And since I've just been turning off comments, it just works easier. And so we'll be focusing on Neanderthal. This will be the last live on this set of subjects. This was 4. And I'm going to try and do that from now on. I'm going to try and keep, other than things like Homo erectus. We'll probably go back into Homo erectus several different times just because of how much Homo erectus tells us about us as a species, and what this means for us and how good this is for us. But we will definitely try and do like just a few series of a few lives touching on different new finds as they're coming across. I do know I have blue lips. Aren't they party? I have blue lips and my eyes are all like shimmery, and so's my forehead. Isn't it gorgeous? I love being able to use modern techniques to do creative and weird things that we've been doing for 500,000 years, because Neanderthals started doing it about 400,000 years ago, painting their faces, doing weird shit, and marking up their bodies so that they can identify who they are as a being to other beings. That's really where we start marking our bodies, why we start decorating ourselves, why we start decorating our clothing, is so that we can identify who we are to others, really. So and my lips do match my shirt. And then I've got gold on my forehead and gold and brown in my shirt. And I love the way that the shirt actually just kind of highlights it's a look. It's a look. And I did it just for you guys. So, mwah. Anyways, um, I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, we're going to cover this. This will be our last one on it. And the only reason we're doing it one last time is the fact that Tuesday morning I ended up having to be late because of other things going on. So that said, let's go ahead and get into the subject. I'm going to go ahead and turn off comments. Um, the question of Neanderthals wearing jewelry, yes, they did. And when we go into Neanderthals starting tomorrow, though we won't get into jewelry tomorrow, we will go into jewelry for Neanderthals and what types of jewelry we actually see with Neanderthal. Probably a little bit later next week, we'll do that. But I'm going to go ahead and turn off comments. It makes it easier for me to focus. Pretty much everybody seems to like it better. I will turn them back on so people can ask questions throughout. Um, it's easy for me, even with subscribers, and I apologize, subscribers. I do like to keep you on later on in the live, but in the beginning, it makes it so much easier for me to be able to focus because even the cool and sweet stuff coming from people is something that I still catch and squirrel on. And so to try not to squirrel, it makes it a little bit easier. If you do not know, I am also over on the YouTube. You can go over there and comment. I do look on the YouTube. I do see on the YouTube. I just see on the YouTube a little bit less because my focus is ahead and the camera's here and the computer's there. And so it's a little bit easier. YouTube is in widow ord, just like this, just no periods. Um, sometimes we're off our period and we like those days. So you're more than welcome to go over there and comment, and I'll get to it if when I notice it. And if you have questions that you're not getting answered here. Again, I will turn on the question ability here after I go over each different subject. And I'm just going to kind of go over from start to finish. There's no order other than that's on the board to remind me. So we're going to start with the Neanderthals almost going extinct twice. Now, first, I want to explain to you how we understand some of these things about Neanderthals. When you look at a genomic study, you can tell quite a few things. You can tell what the genetic diversity of a group is by what their genomes look like. And if you have two or three of a species or two or three of a group, you can tell the genetic diversity of a group or of a species, right? One thing that we see within Neanderthals is that they seem to have had a higher genetic diversity earlier on and then it narrowed out. There also seems to be a lack of Y Neanderthal DNA, Y DNA being the male DNA that passed on from father to son DNA that we have as Y DNA and Neanderthals had at Y DNA, seems to actually be replaced at some point by Homo sapien Y DNA. And so this indicates an earlier breeding between Neanderthal and Homo sapien, and then a separation of the two, and then a later breeding between Neanderthal and Homo sapien. The other thing that we are getting well, first, let me say that genetic diversity and that study of the genome itself will give us a lot of information on how many generations back that mitochondrial DNA goes or that Y DNA goes, how many not family members, but like the diversity of the group that came down to this person, like is it a bunch of cousins marrying, so your genetic diversity is narrow when you get to you. Um, it will tell us a lot in that. And this is how we get a lot of this information. There's also this new testing ability that has come out of the Max Planck Institute. The Max Planck Institute is the institute that's Svante Pablo uh, comes out of, and he is the guy that just won the Nobel Peace Prize for his genomic study of Neanderthals and for his invention of PCR polymerase chain reaction, which enabled him to study the genome of ancient beings, right? So, out of this same institute, another person has invented a new method of study that works kind of in the way that carbon 14 dating can work, depending on how it's done. Carbon 14 dating dates the carbon in in some wood or in bone or just different material things, right? Around like they can carbon 14 date on stone, not the stone itself, but the patina along the cover of like a cave wall, and that's how we've carbon 14 dated the paintings in cave walls. So it works in this way, but another way that it will work is if you are doing, hey, gorgeous, that's my bonus child right there. If you are doing a uh, a tubular test, and I don't write a core sample test, you can pull out carbon from different layers of the strata of the earth in a core sample test. So this new DNA testing kind of does a core sample and is able to pull out DNA in the strata, in the layers of a cave or the earth itself. You probably saw this article that came across like last week that talks about new DNA discovery tells us what life was like in the Antarctic. I think maybe it's the Arctic at or Siberia, in the Siberian Arctic at 2 million years ago. And what it was it core sampled and it DNA the strata of a core sample and pulled up all the shed hairs and bits and pieces of life that get shed into the soil and becomes a part of the soil. And when it did that, it gave the environment, it gave the animals in the environment, it gave the trees in the environment. So they're doing this with DNA in caves for Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens and Denisovians and different species. And this is like a year, 2 years. Like this is so fucking new that they're just pulling up all this information and it's just flooding. So one of these floods is this understanding through this technique that Neanderthals almost went extinct twice before Neanderthals finally went extinct. And the numbers seem to be, and let me pull them up so I have them exact. I want to say 170,000 years ago and then 100,000 years ago. And I never seem to have the right article on this one. That's telling us how it does it, but not which one it is. So I would say, and it'll be up on my thing, I just can't pull it up from my computer. 170,000 years ago and then 100,000 years ago. And there is actually a population boom between these two times. So at about 130,000 years ago, they see a population boom for Neanderthals in a global glacial minimum space. Like, so the next, so we, Neanderthals go through two ice ages from their development. Their development is about our newest dating is 600,000 years ago on Neanderthal. And from that time period to the time of their extinction, they went through a couple of different ice ages. And they were actually went extinct at the height of the last ice age. They go extinct at 30,000 years ago. And at 30,000 years ago is when the ice age starts to recede. But at 130,000 years ago, we were at a glacial medium, like not a maximum, but a medium. And so we see Neanderthals having this population boom in Western Eurasia. And after this population boom and the shrinking again of glaciation or of livable space due to glaciation, we see that Um, I need to take a drink. 1 second. After this shrink, we see them boom, and then we see them shrink again as that glaciation starts. They're being driven out of their homelands. They're being driven down. What we see from that first one is that before the first one at 170,000 years ago, they're more genetically diverse. And then they kind of replace their Y DNA, so their masculine line, with the Homo sapien Y DNA. So when they meet us in the Levant at 150,000 years ago, we see there's a pretty much a replacement of Neanderthal Y DNA by Homo sapien DNA in the Neanderthals that meet with the Homo sapiens in the Levant area. Um, and we're seeing this not only through the genomic testing of the Neanderthals itself, and from the genomic testing and the DNA testing in that core sample. But we're also seeing this in the lack of any Neanderthal Y DNA after 170,000 years ago. So we don't see Neanderthal Y DNA in us, even. We see mitochondrial Neanderthal DNA within us. And yet, we believe that it was more likely that the Homo sapien woman was able to bear a fertile child. So, we're not sure how we don't see Neanderthal DNA in us otherwise. I'm going to go ahead and open it up so that you can ask questions on that subject itself. I will go into the last three subjects on the board after this. This is just for this subject, just about this subject. Though, I mean, you can ask other questions. I'm just saying I'll get to the other ones after we talk about questions from this one. So if you have any questions on this with Neanderthals and with Neanderthal DNA, one thing I want to note that I think is really interesting is that we're actually losing our Y DNA. Hello, Ducray. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Oh, so the prior estimates that I know, well, we thought that they were at 500,000 years ago. So a year ago, when we were talking estimates, we believed that Neanderthal never made it above 500,000 as a species whole during their entire existence. Now we know that they've got another 100,000 years on them. They might have made it above a bit more than that, right? So I don't know. But I think that we're looking at like down to 10 to 20,000 and then up to maybe so no, actually I think we're going to go smaller than that. I think probably 5 to 10,000 then up to 20 to 30,000 because it's talking roughly up to 20 to 30,000 as a boom. And then it would have gone back down as it narrowed down. Currently, to my knowledge, Asia has more Neanderthal DNA than anyone else. Uh, West Asia, West to Mid Asia, or something like that. Maybe it's even East Asia. I looked at this the other day, but to my knowledge, it is Asia, and I believe that it is more that midline, not to the farther east of Asia, but to kind of the edge of East Asia. Yeah, a lot of times we like to think that it's Europeans, but Europeans actually don't have that much. Well, I mean, I think that they're roughly like 2 to 3% on average, and then I think like 4 to 5% on average is Asia. And then I think that you get further down, like into 1%, into, a little bit less, and a little bit more outlying spaces. Like Turtle Island has less. But I don't think that it doesn't really pattern out the way that we want to think it does, right? Because we see a lot of Neanderthals in Europe, in bones in Europe. But what we don't take into account is that what we're seeing in their bones in Europe is their bones, not where they met with us. We're seeing where they lived, not where they lived with us. We have to look at the fact that they lived with us in the Levant. And if they're living with us in the Levant, the natural pathway out of that is towards Asia. it goes up and towards Asia naturally. It actually has to curve back around over this great big bodies of water and through different pathways to get to Europe, right? When you're staying on that lower scale, because you're going to think that for the first 20,000 years, you're really on that lower scale. You're not getting up further until 50, 30,000 years ago because of glacier. So the glaciers start receding from the lower area at 50,000 years ago. They leave or start leaving Britain. So that strata or that longitude, latitude at 30,000 years ago. They haven't fully left Upper Britain until 10,000 years ago, and they didn't leave Scandinavia until roughly 7,000 years ago. So during this time, as you're going up, it's easier to go east than it is to go west because you have to cross bodies of water and mountain ranges to go west. Whereas you don't have to cross those bodies of water, mountain ranges to go east. So the later groups coming out of Africa are more likely, or the Levant area, are more likely to go west than the earlier groups are because the earlier groups really are going to stay along that southern area of west of Eurasia. And at this point, the southern area to the west is all Mediterranean and mountain. Um, but I think that when we look at that along those lines, it's really more easy to see why we wouldn't see Neanderthal in the spaces that are the majority Neanderthal in the spaces that we automatically assume as associated with where the burials of Neanderthals are. What happened in Portlock, Alaska, Earl? I'm not sure. What primitive attributes are we losing with the Y chromosome decrease? That's pretty cool. Um, so, uh, with the Y chromosome decrease, first of all, they do know like other species, other mammals have lost their Y chromosome and have still survived. So it doesn't mean that we're going to go extinct. Um, but the Y chromosome only contains about 55 genes, and they're like non-coding DNA, so it's really not going to matter in that. Um, it's simple and repetitive, and it doesn't seem to do a whole lot, is what it states about it. Um, so I'm not sure what they think we're going to do when it comes to procreation, like how we're going to come down from there, but they think we'll survive. So the World Genomic Project, Zarin, has a world what they can get of a population database. You can submit your DNA to the World Genome, and so they can compile the DNA and the genetics of the globe. Why do I think Neanderthals are so resilient? Um, because they were indigenous fuck. Okay. So the reason that I think Neanderthals and Homo erectus survived so long is because of the fact that they survived as animistic. They survived in tune with the world and the environment around them, which meant that they read the weather and they knew what was changing when it was coming. And so they were able to move, they were able to uh, cook and store food, which we now know Neanderthals did. They were able to adapt all of these things because of the fact that they were that connected to the world around them. And when you are an animal and you're connected to the world around you, adaptation is key to species survival, and you do that. We all do that naturally, but we do that better when we're connected to the world around us. If we're disconnected from the world like we are now, we don't need to adapt to the world, right? So if you are connected to the world, you're able to adapt to the world, you're able to move forward. If you are connected to the world in a symbiotic biome, genome or not genomic, ecological biome, then you're able to get the things that you need when you need them. You're able to adapt your body for starvation periods, which we see happens. Like we see that Neanderthals, some of the short and stocky seems to be an adaptation for that as well, right? You're able to adapt fat layers for that. You're able to create different abilities within yourself to digest different foods, right? So if you are developing in concert with the world around you, if you are part of that biome and a part of that biosphere instead of a step outside of that biosphere, you are able to develop with that biosphere, become one of with that biosphere, right? So that's why I think Neanderthal is more resilient, is because they weren't so egotistical and full of themselves. They were a part of, right? They lived within, right? They weren't so egotistical and full of themselves to think of themselves as a special being given this gift to destroy as we try and get to our next good home, right? This is just something that we get to destroy as we're passing through it. And I think that that's where we lose our resilience. That's where we lose our adaptations. That's where we lose our part of the biosphere. That's where we lose being a concert of nature. So, absolutely. That was a really great question. Thank you, Cooper. This does say Europe is mainly black until 5,000 years ago. We're not there yet, but we will get to that subject. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the comments or turn them on to subscription only so I can read back through and get any questions that were asked. And then I'm going to move on to our next subject. So Portlock, Alaska is a ghost town. Is that what you were saying, DeCray? I'll take a look on Portlock, Alaska. Is there a correlation between Neanderthal DNA and possessing? Okay, so I don't know what HT or MTHFR is. I'm going to look and see what that is. I probably know, just not by that. Um, because I will tell you what I read was mama and effer. So Mediline gene provides instrument. I do not know. I do not know enough about genomics. Like, I only understand the genomics that I was taught because it's something that's hard for me to study because it doesn't make sense verbally to me. I can't express it in a verbal way. And when I can't express it in a verbal way, like there's no syllables in that word, or there's about 3,000 syllables in that word. When I can't express it, it doesn't make sense to me, like it doesn't correlate, unfortunately. KYA is thousands of years ago. All of these ideas come from archaeological journals, archaeological knowledge. I am an archaeologist and a paleoanthropologist. I did medicine before I did archaeology and paleoanthropology, and I've been studying archaeology and history and medicine through Black and Indigenous voices within Indigenous cultures. I am Indigenous 40 fucking years at this point. And so all of this stuff comes from archaeological journals and archaeological finds. The put together is me. And some of it is, and some of it isn't. Some of it's very commonly accepted within the archaeological community, and some of it is a little bit of indigenous thought process in a very white academic field, which is why I entered into archaeology as an indigenous person to kind of destroy that white academic thought process and bring forth a little bit more knowledge because it loses a lot of knowledge in its rigidity and narrowness. But all of this is backed by science. Just sometimes there's a little bit of widow's thoughts, which is why it's a widow's word. Thank you, Golden. Thank you, chicken bread. We are adapting less and changing our environments more. I'm sorry, yeah, most of them, like, they and I got a lot of notices of people, and I, gave, I given out a few free ones too because I got a bunch of free ones last time, and so, uh, I felt bad that people had lost their benefits. I don't have any more free ones to give out though, so I'm glad. I do not have a PhD. I'm not going to seek a PhD in the U.S. I might seek my doctorate in Europe when I go outside after my children are old enough for me to be able to leave the country. One second. They stop killing each other. I have a grand cat staying with me, and he doesn't like his cat aunts and uncles. Sorry, YouTube. Oh, fuck the fuck off. Um, what are you doing? You're weird. Sorry. Sorry, YouTube. Um, so I probably won't go for a PhD here in the United States. The PhD system here in the United States is known to be kind of wonky. A lot of people leave for it. I have to stay for a couple more years, and then once I leave, I'm going to be an expat after a couple of years, anyways. And so I'll probably look for it that way if I look for it at all. Because to be honest, again, I got into it and got a degree because I find Western academic to be problematic. Um, and I didn't go into it so that I could be a part of the system or beat the system from within. I went into it so that I could say, I've got your fucking letters, so you have to listen. Um, and I have other degrees in other fields that don't, well, like because of the US school structure, won't actually translate over credwise because once universities lose their accreditation, you lose your accreditation, even though you did all the fucking work. So it's, a few different degrees. I would have not ever thought of myself as a doctor. Um, I in archaeology. My degrees are in radiography was my first one, and archaeology is my second. Anthropology is my second one. Archaeology being the subfield that I studied of anthropology. Um, I wasn't a doctor. I was raised as a healer in naturopathy, and then got degrees and worked in medicine as an adult, 20, 30-year-old. Yeah. Oh, no, you're fine, Decree. Okay, so I think that we've got all of the questions on Neanderthals. I'll go ahead and move into Australians and cassowaries. This is really fascinating to me. So, what this one is, from 1 second. Let me pull it up again. What this is cassowaries are a big bird in New Zealand that's actually pretty deadly. They have like very sharp talons, and they'll attack. They're pretty aggressive. There is a find of a bunch of eggshells, and the find of the bunch of eggshells, it's what we would call like a midden pit, basically. A midden pit being kind of a garbage pit, basically. And so in these midden pit shell finds, what they have found is a bunch of these cassowary eggs are fully grown, and they're cooked. So this looks like this delicacy that's still eaten today, in which you will wait until the fertilized egg is almost fully developed, and then you'll eat the fetal chick within. And so some of them show that, but some of them show no cooking on them. They looked at over 1,000 fragments of fossilized cassowary shells in two separate caves. And what they're finding is that several of them are actually being hatched out. And so cassowaries will imprint at hatching. And so what they think happened is that that imprinting at hatching um, gave them the ability to raise cassowaries as either a defensive bird or a hunting bird, right? uh, which is something that's done in societies today, and something that we see being pretty effective, in fact. But the carbon dating on this is putting it at 18,000 years ago. And carbon dating on this at 18,000 years ago really gives the ability to see that this kind of husbandry and breeding of animals and keeping of animals predates or not horses, well, horses obviously, but predates cattle and sheep and goats and dogs, because we look at dogs as 10,000 years ago at the start of the domestication of the wolf, right? Um, and we look at the same sort of domestication for animal husbandry at 10,000 years ago. So this would be a domestication of birds by indigenous Australians 8,000 years before anybody else started domesticating anything else. Which really gives this idea that human development and our understanding of capability really needs to look in some off places, because it doesn't really look in a lot of what it considers the off places. Again, we get back to the fact that Western academia has kind of identified that only white America or white European spaces have any knowledge or any advancement. And so they're only looking in those spaces for that. And if you're only looking in those spaces for the evidence of those things, then you're only finding the evidence in those spaces, right? And you slough off all the other evidence, pyramids, 31,000-year-old surgery of the foot amputation in Borneo, the Egyptians performing plastic surgery, pyramids in Peru, pyramids in Indonesia. When you look at the other evidence and stop ignoring it, you can actually see that these advancements of society are actually pretty global, and way further back than we like to think of them. Way further back than we like to think of them. I know, like I've stated, and I do have an issue with things like ancient alien theories, and the idea of like ancient apocalypse, where we're looking at some master race that goes out and creates this technology and destroys themselves and spreads across the planet and teaches everybody. Um, I have issue with that because of the fact that it's very racist. It says that people couldn't do it on their own, right? They needed somebody else to teach them. Um, but I never, ever, ever have believed for a second that we haven't been doing amazing, beautiful, intense things for hundreds of thousands of years. And it is only in the lack of science between 400 and 1600 CE within Europe that lost the knowledge. And that when we remember that knowledge allowed us to be so, again, with like the Neanderthals, so intermixed within the biome around us, within the world around us, to be a part of instead of separate from, that we had these advanced sciences. We just can't see them because we didn't leave a record of shit we didn't need to. There was no need to be remembered for eons. There was no need to leave record, right? Because you were just a part. So this is with the Australians and the cassowaries. There's not really a whole lot of information on it, but I do find it a very important thought process an idea that we need to look at because, again, like Alm just said, shout out to those off places, right? We should really be looking to those places to really understand just how far back we go as an intelligent, advanced species. I'll go ahead and open it up again. Um, and as long as we stay under 100 or roughly around 100 and it doesn't get weird, I'll probably just leave it open for the rest of the chat. The small ones have a tendency to be less trolly, and so it's way easier for me to focus. Um, and then we'll get into the last two. I really love the women in the early church. I think that's really cool. So my problem with books is that most of the books, by the time publishing happens, the information is outdated these days. We are like, um, so, uh, oh man, he slipped my head, and I know him, or know his name. The guy who discovered, or not discovered, but the guy who is doing the dig on Homo naledi and is heading the Homo naledi, did a lecture that is in the link tree in my bio. In the lecture that he did, he was talking about the, not a lecture, but a presentation about the discovery of fire usage within Homo naledi, and not only that, but uses of fire to travel into caves. So, like some form of torch. Um, he talks in there about the fact that, in the last, like, 10 years ago, we had like a total of 8 fossils of Neanderthal, and now, or 21 fossils of Neanderthal, and now we have over hundreds of fossils of Neanderthal. Like, so we are at a stage where so much is just blowing up in the field that you're going to see anything that's written by the time it's published is just, something new has come along that may like push the dating back further or significantly change some aspect of what you said. So publication of books is really hard. Journal articles are really good because those can be done relatively fast. There are a lot of journal articles on a lot of these subjects in the link tree in my bio. All of these should be in there. Um, and they can give you the ability to go and research a little bit more, see who's talking about it, what uh, places it comes out of, like the what labs, what associations, what universities it's coming out of, the studies are coming out of, so you can go and look in depth further from that space too, which will give you absolutely. I had it down earlier because I like to have his image up, and somebody said, "Could I move it?" Because I was being covered. Well, I was being covered. So yeah, uh, the Kinnis image is a beautiful image. This is Cheddarman, for those who don't know. And Cheddarman is he is absolutely beautiful. Um, the content, CW means content warning. They only gave me a certain number of words, and I cuss a lot, and I don't pull my punches. So CW means content warning. I think that they're doing their best. I think everybody's really thoughts on how the field is handling the abundance of findings recently. I think that they're doing their best. I think that it can be a little bit overwhelming, but I also think that they're just all very excited. It's like a kid in a candy store. It seems like this. Oh my god! Oh my god! I know that's how I feel. Like I feel like a kid in a candy store. Oh my god, that's new. Oh my god. Oh, that tells. Oh, I knew that one. I laid bets on that shit. I laid bet on that shit. So. Not my final live on these subjects on this list is my final live. We will start to Friday morning doing a live on Neanderthals, and we're going to do a few weeks of Neanderthals with a few different subjects. Our first subjects are going to be some of the other species that we see from the Neanderthal genome and what this tells us of ghost species and different things. And then we'll be talking about how we define language ability to speak within Neanderthals. And that will be our first series of lives on Neanderthals. Everything currently is being recorded on YouTube. I'm dual streaming. So like this live currently is being streamed on YouTube. So you can go to my YouTube and you're going to be able to find them there for most of them. Yeah, like Webb telescope findings. Like that new science just gives us this ability to see in such a deeper depth. And it's like, oh, like 5 KYA is 5,000 years ago. KYA is thousands of years ago. No, but it's absolutely not. I did happen to see the Chatterman's living descendant story, 300 generations and a mile from where they found Chatterman. So he lives a mile from his 300th great grandfather. Was just amazed by that. And I love Kinnis and Kinnis images. Kinnis and Kinnis images are the best. Um, to getting a high paying job in anthropology. I don't have a job in anthropology, so I could not tell you about the getting a high paying job in anthropology. Um, I prefer to just give it away for free because that's just me, and I can't really work right now because of other shit. Um, I would say networking, networking, networking is your best bet in anything like archaeology and anthropology. Another thing I'm not the greatest at. So, and this is absolutely not my final live. I'm sorry on these subjects. I didn't mean it to come across like that. I think Neanderthals were where they were going extinct. The question is, were Neanderthals where they were going extinct? And I think that they were where they were going extinct. I think that they were aware that they were going extinct because what we see with Neanderthals is that they start really breeding with other beings. You're going to see that there's smaller numbers, right? So they're saying that there was a great genetic diversity first, and then that genetic diversity narrows. So you're going to see that and you're going to go, well, shit, like we used to have 10,000 of us and there's only 10 of us left. Maybe we need to get some dick from outside, right? Like you're going to see that you're going to be aware that you don't have as many beings as you used to have, and that you're going to need to get genetics from outside. Otherwise, you're going to be marrying your cousin, which they did. We do know now that they were so genetically narrow by the end that there was a lot of familial marriage and familial partnership. Wicca is the oldest etymology of the word witch. Wid means knowledge and da is feminine. It's the ancient Gaelic language. And so the Wicca and the Druid, Drew meaning sorry, Drew meaning oak and Wid meaning again knowledge. The Wicca and the Druid were the scholarly class of the Celtic people. They were their academics. They did their doctors, their lawgivers and law keepers, their teachers, their scientists, and their priests. And we just think of them as only being their priests. And I use Wicca because, well, for a lot of reasons, a lot of connection for me. And I use it as a science title because, again, I don't really buy into white academia. Western academia is not really my thing, though I have degrees in Western academia. Um, I have a lot of problems with the way Western academia works, and so I tend more towards indigenous ways. I grew up Turtle Island indigenous. I have Turtle Island indigenous blood, mighty white in skin tone though, and so I also have a tendency to search out my indigenous European roots, so and study my European ancestry, um, so that nobody thinks I'm taking anything that's not mine. Hello, darling daughter of mine. Uh, I did not do a video on Chatterman's relatives. There's a few articles on Chatterman's direct descendant. I'll see if I've got one bookmarked and I'll try and post it to the uh, link tree. Sorry, brain fart. Yeah, Cheddarman. I haven't really looked at the dude, but that's possible. This rendition of him makes me think of the guy who played Ragnar in Vikings. I totally see Ragnar from Vikings in this. Yeah, I love language. Language is huge. And so we found 5 years ago their first evidence. In fact, I found I when I was pulling up my things, my bookmarks, one of the first bookmarks that I have on this account is the first finding of a hyoid bone for Neanderthal. And I have studied and loved the Neanderthal since I was 12 years old. And I had always thought they had to have had language. Why do you think that they didn't have language? They were humans. And so when the hyoid bone find came out, I was just plotting in love. And so that will be something that we're talking about, that article, and how it just brought about this huge change of knowledge. For me, that's an amazing thing, the language abilities, verbal language abilities in other species. I don't think that the Neanderthals were othered once they became sparse because we see that they were breeding with us at that time. We now have proof that they were breeding with us, like their last 1,000 years of existence in France, that we were living together and mixing in that last 1,000 years of their existence, really. So that's, I don't think that they really did a lot of othering, and I don't think we othered them at all. I would say jelly brains. I would go into it if it's something that you want to do, but most of your jobs stateside are going to be CRM, which is going out and in government digs and stuff like that, and making sure that remains are not disturbed, like at a highway or things like that, checking things, doing little digs. You have to be very physically capable in a way that I've tried to participate in digs and I leave in tears physically because I just physically can't. Um, to do digs and to do CRM. So I would say that you're going to find mainly CRM in the States. To get research, you're going to have to do it independently or have somebody who really likes you and wants you to assist for them. So you have to have those connections. And or you have to just be willing to do it all on your own without funding, basically. The Cheddarman family, I would Google direct descendant of Cheddarman, and that will give you the guy, even a picture of him, I think. Awesome, Coco. So Wida really was knowledge and feminine. So wid is knowledge to them. Wid in its roots is wisdom is a root of that, right? Wise, because it's Proto-Indo-European. So Proto-Indo-European like goes all the way from like Turkey over. And so Proto-Indo-European wisdom, with is that root, right? And so wid, knowledge. And then da, we see da as the feminine in many cultures, and it's definitely the feminine. Peter Beresford Ellis is a prominent linguist and anthropologist, anthropologist and linguist. And he did a book called The Druids, and that is where I get my information on the word Wicca and what it meant. Well, I'm not sure what you think this man is mixed with because there wasn't a lot of white people around when he came around. So he's not mixed with anything. He just is, and his skin is dark because he came from a space where he needed dark skin. And we see that light eyes develop in Homo sapiens in Europe first. We see that light skin just doesn't really come along until later, and that's why we're looking at 5,000 years ago. It was up until 5,000 years ago, it was more black than it was white, because you can use black skin everywhere the species is. That's why black skin is a species advantage, but you can only use white skin in a couple of areas. That's why white skin is not a species advantage. Awesome, Vera. Oh, so proud. That's great. I don't know if they had special body language for communication. That'd be very hard for us to distinguish. We'd have to have like some very expressive art for something like that. Hey, Doc. I do have strong thoughts about whether or not we should attribute Neanderthal extinction to Homo sapien. My strong thoughts on that are we did not kill them, we bred with them. All evidence points to have not having fights with them. We didn't fight with them. We lived side by side with them for 100,000 years in kindness and love and shared technology and beds. Really, we had sex with every species we came across. We like to fuck things. We don't like to fight things. And we they're with us. I can't show his picture on there, Katie. I'm sorry. Actually, let me see. Uh it won't. Oh God, I don't know how to use YouTube enough. Um I know what I can do. One second. Maybe I can do this. Um, but we pretty much had sex with everything instead of killed it. Um, and what we find with that is that Neanderthal is still in us. There is actually more Neanderthal DNA today than there was when the Neanderthals were here. I'm going to move this and see. It's going to try and follow me for a hot second. Let's see if we can get it to. I'm going to pop back. Sorry, this is going to be weird for just a second. Over here, let me make sure. So this is a picture of what Cheddarman looks like in this rendition of him. Sorry, two different screens, y'all. It gets a little bit weird sometimes. Um, and YouTube doesn't do enough. I don't understand YouTube enough. I don't understand this very well either. So I don't think Neanderthals actually extinct. There's more of their DNA today than there was when they were alive because they never made it above 500,000 as a species whole to our understanding. And so with say 7 out of 8 billion people alive having Neanderthal within them because we see Neanderthal in everything except for two spaces in Africa, um, then we are absolutely looking at Neanderthal never having gone extinct. They're still here. Yes, the DNA. So in Asians currently today, we see that the percentage of Neanderthal DNA is highest among the Asian population. They did the majority of their breeding with Homo sapien in the Levant area, and then they went up and out. There is thought now that that last 12,000 no 1,200 years that they were in France, that they were living with us, like maybe there was 2 3,000 years in West Europe that they were living side by side with Homo sapiens and mixing. But it would have only been a couple of mixes because we're looking at a small population at that time in a very small time period. And so we probably only got like one or two fertile offspring out of that. This is not the final live. It's the final live on this subject. Sorry, I did not mean for that to be confusing. Thank you, guide. I did 4 on this subject. That's why I'm going to go ahead and retire this subject. We're going to do probably 2 or 3 on our first set of lives on Neanderthal, which is going to be the presence of other species that we see within Neanderthal DNA, some of that ghost species information, and then how we identify Neanderthals having speech and hearing, or the hearing that we have. And then we'll be moving into different things like clothing within Neanderthal, food within Neanderthal, decoration within Neanderthal. Probably the next is going to be cave painting and jewelry. So we'll do probably 3 lives, maybe a week, 2 to 4 lives on the speech and on the other species that we see within their DNA and what their DNA says and the different DNA factors with this. And then we'll go into speech in that, and then we'll move in for probably 4 lives, 2 to 4 lives on the next section, which will be art and jewelry. Thank you, Maverick. This is not the final live. I'm so sorry, everybody. I need to change that. Well, it's the last time we're gonna have it up. I'm so sorry, though. I didn't mean for anybody to think I was leaving. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. Because white skin is a later thing, it's an adaptation. So the question is why skin is not a species advantage, why wasn't it evolved out? So we have the just recently identified that this gene that allows for light skin is 900,000 years old. But we only recently started expressing it as a species in large numbers. Like, so you'll see even in South African populations that have always been South Africa, every once in a while, a child will pop up that's very light skinned. This is a recessive gene. Um, same the other way, you'll see two very light parents every once in a while will pop up a very dark child is a recessive gene. So light skin was a recessive gene for a long, long period. And then after the mixing with Neanderthals and then the moving up into Europe, and really we've only been in some parts of Europe for 7,000 years, 6,000 years. Most of Europe, well, we didn't populate any of Europe until 50,000 years ago. So we really took a while to adapt. And then we see that light skin as an adaptation really is only in a couple of areas that it gets really, really light. Um, and then we see that within those areas, the time that people have been within those areas shows the adaptation timeline within those areas and how long it took them to adapt to that lighter skin. And then we see that it takes a while for it to become a majority of the population, which is why we don't see it really becoming the majority of the European population until 5,000 years ago, as is stated on the screen behind me. Um, with that, what we see is that we're not breeding it out. We're using this adaptation in an environment where we needed an adaptation because that's the miraculous thing about our skin is that we can adapt our skin. It's a trick that Homo erectus gave us that gave Homo erectus the ability to populate the globe and gave us the ability to populate the globe. The reason it's not a species advantage is it's an advantage in a specific area, but it's not an advantage in every area that the species is in. For it to be a species advantage, it has to be an advantage in every area that the species is in. Dark skin is an advantage in every area that the species is in because dark skin prevents UV rays from causing cancer and because dark skin prevents overdose from vitamin D. You can get vitamin D from things other than the sun. So dark skin works in every area. Therefore, dark skin is a species advantage, but light skin is not a species advantage. Light skin is a later day adaptation of the species. I don't know of any difference in joints and mobility. Well, okay, so I take that back. So there is some thought that they're not sure if their shoulder girdle gave them the ability to do the overarm throw that they would need to for an atlatl, but there's also other evidence that Neanderthal were able to use atlatls. So, like, there's and then there's so we're not exactly sure. There is some evidence that their shoulder girdle would have made it more difficult to do certain movements that we're capable of doing. But not necessarily that there's a lot of differences other than that. Like, there's not a lot of lower leg differences. I think maybe their feet are slightly different, but they're as expediently bipedal as we are. Oh, that's cool, Kaya. I like me my gingers. Oh, that's really cool, Kaya. I just got the second half of that. That's pretty cool. Well, and okay, so it is thought that green eyes and red hair come from Neanderthal. And we do see green eyes and red hair in Africa. We also do our later studies, and there are papers on this in the link tree in my bio that we know that pretty much all of Africa has Neanderthal heritage without having pre-colonization. Pre-colonization, pretty much all of Neanderthal has, or of Africa has Neanderthal heritage. um, it's only two spaces within Africa, the Khoisan population, and somebody told me the other one the other day, and I have it bookmarked, and I still Oyo, the Oyo, Oyo population in West Africa are the two populations that do not have Neanderthal DNA, but they have ghost species DNA within them, which are species that we see in our genome, but not in the fossil record. Neanderthal DNA doesn't seem to be more prominent in northern regions, unless you mean like northern region in Africa, which yes, but the most Neanderthal DNA seems to be in Asia, like Near East, Middle East, edge of the Far East. I don't know if the Neanderthal DNA becomes more advantageous in us and becomes an evolutionary advantage. I know that they look into things like that, but I'm not sure. Yes, I consider Indians from India, Asia, because that is on the Asian continent. Moors are typically North African people that moved in a specific group in North Africa that moves into the Iberian Peninsula. Um, 4 or 500, maybe it was a little bit later. I think it's actually a little bit later. I think you're looking at right before, because yeah, okay. So Ferdinand and Isabel defeat the Moors, and so it's right before Ferdinand and Isabel. They're already Islamic because they move in with Islam and they take over the Iberian Peninsula with Islam. Islam treated the Iberian Peninsula beautifully. And then Ferdinand and Isabel bring in Catholicism and eradicate Islam and start the Inquisition. So you're looking at, I think it's 1300 to 1600 in Iberia, but I can't remember. We're not talking that time period right now, so it's not off the top of my head. There are some significant physical differences between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. We've gone over those a few times in my lives on Homo erectus. The significant physical differences, in brief, is that Neanderthals are going to be shorter and stockier because the less skin you have, the skin dissipates heat and retains heat. And if you have less skin, it retains more heat. And so you want less skin, shorter, stockier. Um, that's heat retention. We also see that they have lighter skin. There's some thought process that that has to do with some heat retention. There's also the knowledge that it does give better vitamin D from the sun to have lighter skin. And they did speciate in a highly cloud heavy environment. And then we know that their noses are shaped differently, like the internal structure of their nose, as in this is wider. So it's very narrow here on us. The slits are very narrow and long, but on a Neanderthal, they're very wide. And their noses protrude further out, and their mid-face prognosis means they have greater sinuses, so they warm the air before it gets to their brains. And they speciate with light eyes because light eyes are a low light adaptation, and they needed that in the low light of the European continent that they are in European area that they speciate in. Homo sapiens speciating in Africa, both speciating from the same species. Homo sapien keep the dark skin of Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis. Um, they speciate with 4C hair because 4C hair forms a lattice work and like this shade over the top of the head. And the lattice work allows airflow to cool the brain, like the nose structure in Neanderthal warms the air before it hits the brain. And they speciate very tall and lean, as opposed to Neanderthals short and stocky. Again, having to do with heat dissipation, you can dissipate more heat over a broader expanse of skin. And so tall and lean dissipates more heat. And dark eyes because dark eyes are needed in the high sun environment that they were in at the time. Um, and those are really the main differences that you see within the skeletal and physical structure. We also see that Neanderthals have obligatory midwifery like we do, meaning that they have to have assistance in childbirth like we do, but they have 4 life stages compared to our 5 life stages. And we believe that that's significant in the differences in our brain capacity or neuron firing. I do have most of them on a YouTube channel. Some of the lives I've only put up a couple about specific subjects. I did Erectus for like 2 months. So like I only put up two of Erectus and they're about 4 or 5 hours long, but they are on the YouTube channel. I don't want to discuss the early church right now. Well, we will get, oh, okay, so that part, we will get to the women in the early church. Sorry, I thought we were going somewhere else because we were just talking about something else. Um, okay, so guys, I'm going to go in to our next subject, and it's kind of going to probably do a few different things. Um, we've kind of hit a bit on Europe being mainly black until 5K years ago, 5,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. Um, but we will go into it a little bit more. But first, let's go into women in the early church. So, first, I want you to understand that women in earlier societies have a tendency to be predominant in earlier societies. We don't really see women being submissive in early societies until much later. Currently in archaeology, we're finding that the Neanderthals that we thought were men because they were larger and they had bone structure that showed that they did hunting, like wearing on their bones that showed that they did hunting, are actually female. Out of all the Neanderthals that we've identified, we haven't found a male that we've been able to like genetically identify yet. This is part of the reason that we're wondering what's going on with the Neanderthal Y chromosome, right? Because we're not finding a Neanderthal Y chromosome in these beings. Um, but we think that most of the ones that we thought were warriors and the larger of the species is absolutely female at this point. Um, we also see that as we go down through history, women are leaders and warriors pretty much everywhere. We see that the Egyptians had 17 queens in their role of kings. We see that early Samaria had female rulers. We see that early Assyria has female rulers. It is not until we see the toxic patriarchy that comes out of Greek culture that is based on the fact that the Greeks like to mentor young men, teenage boys sexually. And so their pedophilia kind of gives them this need to create this to be okay and a reason to not have sex with women. And so you see that they dehumanize women and turn women into less. This is our first advent of toxic patriarchy, and it absolutely goes along the lines of, that need to minimize women's impact because they would prefer young boys. We see that when the Romans adapt this, they appropriate everybody's culture. That's what the Romans do. They go out and they steal people's cultures and they appropriate it and they twist it and they change it and they fuck with it. That's what they did to Christ. That's what they did to the Greeks. So they did to the Etruscans, who they stole their culture and killed them. This is what the Romans do. Cultural appropriation 101 is Rome. So we see that they take that, they take this idea of toxic patriarchy and they take this idea that women are less. Um, and in this time frame, you're looking at a world in where women are leading. Boudica defeats the Romans. She is the queen of the Iceni, whose husband was a client king. And when he died, she inherited, and the Romans refused her right of inheritance and gang raped her 12 and 11-year-old daughters. And beat her viciously. And so she gathered the Celtic tribes and murdered the Romans and overthrew London and almost drove the Romans out of Britain. We see that the greatest Scandinavian warrior that we have ever found, the highest ranking general that we have ever found, is a woman. We see that the Scythians, the warriors within the Scythians, were females through DNA testing of Scythian warrior graves. This is our Amazons from Greek and Roman mythology. We see that women are ruling the world. We see that Zenobia, the great great granddaughter of Cleopatra VII, the last queen of the Egyptians, is the queen of Palmyra that defeats the Romans. We see that Genghis Khan's granddaughter is the highest ranking general of her father's army. We know her today as the woman who challenged 100 men to wrestle, said, I won't marry a man who can't defeat me in wrestling, and beat 100 men in wrestling. But she was also the greatest general of her father being the son of Genghis Khan. So we see that in this time period, women are ruling everywhere except Rome. And Rome decides in 400 to go from a triumvirate to a singular ruler. And what happens is Constantine decides that he should rule everything. He doesn't want to have to deal with the stupid triumvirate anymore. How do I make it to where everybody wants to follow one king instead of three? Well, we're so used to following all of these gods. Maybe if I can narrow this down to one god and get rid of this mass pantheon, then I can get everybody to follow one ruler. So he takes a religion that is slowly forming that is kind of appropriating another man's religion already, because Christ really was telling the Jews to stop breaking their Bible. Like, the Jews are supposed to be following the Torah and they're not following the Torah. And Christ is like, dude, this is not what you're supposed to do. The Torah says this, right? And so he's not like he's not trying to change, and he's also trying to lead a revolt. Really, he is. I mean, that's what the Messiah was the purpose to lead the revolt against Rome, right? And so in all of this, uh, after he is killed, you see that there's this group of slaves and women in Rome who start taking the things that he said and twisting them. Now, many of Christ's disciples were actually, in fact, women. We know this now. And so following him as a female is really understood. He was very kind and generous towards women, especially in a space and a time when women were considered less within Rome, right? Not considered less within Judaism. Orthodox Judaism that considers women less is a later invention. Early Judaism does not consider women less. Anyways, um, so we see that Constantine in his need to do this, and he decides to take over this faith that seems to be appealing to the less of his classes, the least of his people. The women and the slaves seem to be enthralled in this faith that tells them that if they are meek and do nothing while they're being beaten, that they will be richly rewarded in an afterlife. So it gives Constantine the ability to do whatever the fuck he wants to them, because they're hanging on to the idea that as soon as he kills them, their reward comes. And the greater their suffering is, the greater their reward, right? And so this is a perfect religion if you're trying to enforce your domain over people, right? And so he appropriates this and he twists this. But we see that the early leaders are the slaves and the women, because they are the people who are following it already. And they're going into other cultures that are led by women. There's several named, right? But this is the one that we're talking about today. This came across recently, and I'm going to put this in YouTube, for those on YouTube, so that you can go ahead and go to the site and look at the pictures as I'm putting them up on TikTok. And I'll be pulling them over on, or flipping the camera on TikTok to show this. This find came across a couple of weeks ago, in December 14th, actually. So this is a necklace that we're looking at right now. And you can see this inlay here in the necklace pieces and these little coins, right? Here is a recreation. I noticed when I was showing this the other day that they kind of recreated it backwards. Like, you've got this inlay and this inlay, but we see it over here as inlay. Come on. Inlay and then coin over here. But we see this little piece here, and it's kind of like this square cross. This is X-rayed. This has dissolved, or not dissolved, but they haven't been able to get it out. This is a silver cross. And these little silver faces were found on this silver cross, are left of this silver cross. This shows us a woman leading in the early Christian church. Now, for many people who don't really study a lot of what's going on in the early Christian churches, is really different and new. But there's a lot of early martyrs that are women. In fact, the vast majority of the early martyrs in the early martyrs in the church are women. And we do know that slaves were prevalent in the early church as leaders. St. Patrick was a slave, right? And so we also know that the world around at this point has so many women leaders that if you're going in as a ambassador for a faith, It's really good to have equal, right? To have that respect of equality. And women be women. Hey sis, what's up? Right? Like women be women. We have that kind of ability to set each other at ease sometimes in a way that you don't really get in another space. And so you're absolutely not going to see that in places that women are leading, that a man coming in is going to find himself as putting her as at ease as he's demanding things of her, right? That a woman is going to be more at ease for her. And so and you also see that if you're going into spaces where women in leadership is prevalent, but at that time it's a man leading, that a woman going into that space is going to be seen as an equal because it's on average that women are equal within that space. And it's also going to be seen as more of a woman's domain, usually the spiritual, the esoteric, the creation of it is more the woman's domain a lot of the times. That care of the environment, where men tend to view their care of the environment more as the physical care of the environment, and women seem to take care of more of the esoteric of the environment. So you're going to see that puts this ease in this transmission of religion. And it gives that almost natural flow, especially in places where women deities are highly revered within the home, right? If you're looking at women deities being the center of a home, the center of a hearth, the center of fertility, the center of fire, which you do see in a lot of Celtic and Germanic spaces, Freya, Brigid, um, you are seeing that this transmission, especially with, really sainthood and things like that, is a lot easier. So that really leads us, unless there's questions on that, we can go into Europe. But I'll let there see if there's any questions on that subject specifically or the prior subjects before I go into Europe. Sorry, I had some messages. Ah, haha. Realize that we're not all evil. We're not innately evil, that we're innately communal and kind. There's nothing wrong with the patriarchy in and of itself. There's wrong in the toxic patriarchy that says that there is a uh, dimorphism instead of a balance, right? And that says that gender is binary and that binary represents fault and weakness and monolithic. Um, and then spread that understanding, right? And then because the patriarchy isn't the problem, not currently. Is the patriarchy part of the root? Yeah. Is colonialism part of the root? Yeah. But the current problem is capitalism. The current problem is the idea that there is a direct trade in value of your time, your energy, your worth for $1. That your worth is valued based on the earning of that dollar. So we have to get rid of the idea that worth is based on what you can exploit from me, and understand that worth isn't about exploitating another person. Another person's worth isn't about what they're exploitable for. But that worth is in the life itself, and not just in the life of another human itself, but in all life itself. Because without the trees or the animals or the earth underneath my feet or the air or the clouds, I don't live, right? And if all of our energy, which is proven, we're all energy and all that energy is intertwined, which is proven. And if all of this is real, then that means that everything I do that affects you affects me too, directly. It's not even karmatic, right? If I'm a giant ball of energy like this, and I poke this part of the energy feels it, right? If we're all one body and I poke my cheek, my foot feels it, right? So, or it affects my foot, right? Acupuncture. So, if we can realize that we're all affecting each other with all of our actions, that our worth is about being, just being, not about what's exploitable from us, right? And we can get that knowledge widespread, then you will dismantle the capitalism that is supporting the colonialism and the patriarchy. Um, and then we have to work on othering. And we kind of have to work on this in this diametric, right? Because if we can understand that all beings have worth just by being, then we can remove the idea that some beings have more worth than others, right? Othering. So if we can get those two things out, right, then really we dismantle every single part of that structure. We dismantle the capitalism that says that you're exploitable. We dismantle the colonialism that says that my God says I'm better. We dismantle the stratification that says that the narcissistic God King maintains being on top. And we dismantling the othering that in gives the basis of all of that. When the whole is healthy, society is healthy, right? We have to stop thinking, God, what is that comedian who always goes around with his shirt off? Big old belly, just jolly as fuck, always has his shirt off. And he's talking about looking at his kids. I think it was him talking about looking at his kids. And his kids were arguing because one of the kid had more ice cream than the other, right? And he goes, your problem is that you're looking in your brother's bowl to make sure your brother doesn't have more than you do. You're supposed to be looking in your brother's bowl to make sure your brother has enough. We are looking to make sure that nobody has it better than us. We stopped looking to make sure that everybody has enough. Thank you, Cooper. Gaffigan, I think so. Zach Gaffigan. Yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. And that's totally it. Totally it. We have stopped looking to make sure that our brother has enough, and we just look to make sure we have more. Gotta better him. Gotta be better. Gotta be better. You know, is it Jim? It is Jim. Who's Zach? Oh, fuck me. I don't know. But yes, him. And he's awesome. But I think that you have to get both of those. But I think that once you remove the idea that your worth is what you're exploitable for, I think that that domino affects the rest. Because if your worth is just in the being, just in being alive, you have worth, right? Then othering ends. Worth is equal out of life, right? If you apply equal worth to a tree, you can't other somebody because of the color of their skin. The tree's human, but the person from another country isn't, right? Okay, so let me go ahead. Sigh. The person behind me is Cheddarman. Cheddarman is or was our earliest find in Britain. This last year, we found two earlier finds, one at 14,000 years ago and one at 13,000 years ago. Haven't DNA'd them yet, to my knowledge. When they did Cheddarman's genomic study, and as I keep getting told, Right after it, it was debunked, but the debunction has been debunked. But when they did Cheddarman's genomic study, they found that the identification markers or alleles for his skin shows that his skin color was what they equate to the alleles for sub-Saharan skin tone. So they state that it's not only dark of skin, but it is the same dark of skin that we currently associate with sub-Saharan skin darkness, the same alleles and genetics. Um, what they are finding is that Cheddar Man is a part of a group of pastoralists and early agriculturalists in Britain. Maybe it's late hunter gatherers and early pastoralists in Britain. And we know that the group that he belonged to, the mitochondrial haplogroup of the group that he belonged to, represents about 10% of European population currently. Um, and we know that he has a direct descendant that lives a mile from where he was found in Britain. It's a 300 generation direct great grandson. What we know with Cheddar Man is that the vast majority of the people that we see that settle Europe with dark skin and blue eyes or light eyes. And what we're seeing with this is that the light eyes are developing first because light eyes are a low light adaptation. It's needed faster, right? I can get vitamin D from plants. I can get vitamin D from animals. I cannot get vitamin D from the sun and still get it from other sources. What I can't do is see the predators really well if I don't have the low light eye adaptation. And so you see that the adaptation for low light develops first because it is necessary. And we also see that most people aren't making it into most parts of Europe until 10,000, 7,000 years ago, right? Again, this glacial maximum starts ending at about, so I think the end starts at 50,000 years ago. Maybe it starts at 40,000 years ago. We start to see us leaving the Levant at 50,000 years ago, but we go along the very southerly areas of Eurasia. And mainly at this point, what we are seeing is mainly East Eurasia. We are seeing some over in the Levant, or not the Levant, the Mediterranean area, but not as much. You're seeing that from there, it's moving upwards as the glaciers recede. So at 40,000 years ago, you're really getting into more of the Mediterranean area and this kind of right above, what is it, the Byzantium area, right? And then at 30,000 years ago, you're getting a little bit more into that middle strip. You're seeing that the lowest end of Britain is starting to come out from underneath the ice. And then at um, 20,000 years ago, you're seeing about half of Britain is out from under ice and along that same latitude. And then at 7,000 years ago, you see Scandinavia is out of ice. But you're not seeing these places out of ice until then. So you're not seeing Homo sapiens moving into these areas until then. And then what you're seeing is that they're moving in with the low light adaptation for the eyes, but not the skin. The vast majority of the population seems to be dark. Of course, you're going to see a few lighter skinned people, but the vast majority is dark. Roughly 6 to 5,000 years ago, you start to see about 50% of the population being light of skin. About 2,000 years ago, you're going to see that about 70 to 80% of the population is light of skin. And then at 90,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, you're going to see that roughly 90% of the population is light of skin. But even in the sagas, you are going to see that some of the main characters in the Icelandic sagas, this is a translation of the Icelandic sagas, some of the main characters are dark of skin. Egil is dark of skin, and his entire family line is dark of skin. Oh, that's horrible, Tamara. Absolutely, please tag me. I knew this biker when I was 14, 15 who was just beautiful. And I mean, so he was probably 40 or 50. He was extremely dark of skin, but like gray of hair. And some of he had dreadlocks and a goatee. And then some of it was gray. And he had the brightest baby blue eyes that I have ever seen on a human being. No contacts, no joking, no nothing. Naturally, the brightest baby blue eyes. And he was darker than Cheddarman behind me. He was that beautiful, really dark, rich chocolate that you can get that is just like, oh, and he was very dark, but he had very bright, like I always think of them as like pool blue eyes, right? Or sea blue eyes, like that Krillian bright blue, you know? And so it constantly amazes me that people don't know that like we can do that. Like people are like, oh, you had to. It's like, no, like most people don't know that Sitting Bull had gray eyes and curly hair. Like you can absolutely see recessive genes coming to a forefront in every population. Every population. We all have these recessive genes. We all get these recessive genes from before we even leave Africa. We have these recessive genes. And we can all get these recessive genes in every space, even today. Even in South Africa, you can pop out with a redhead, pop out with somebody with blue eyes, no colonizer bloodline happens, right? We have to get over this idea that so family line and genetics, huge, right? Who your grandmother was, ancestry, huge part of who we are, right? But you're not seeing that that has anything to do with whether or not you have the ability to pop recessive genes or whether or not you have all the genes already there, right? The genes are there, they're just not dominant within you, right? Right, absolutely, Maverick. Carrie Ann, I'm not sure which book you mean. Out of Africa is not debunked in the way you think it is. A singular expedition out of Africa has absolutely been debunked. The argument within the archaeological community is not whether or not we all started in Africa, because we know we did. It is how many times we left Africa. That's it. Oh, the sagas. The sagas of the Icelanders. This is a translation. They're all translations these days. This is a penguin. The preface is Jane Smiley. And the translators, Katrina Atwood, George Clark, Ruth Ellison, Terry Gunnell, Kneva Kunz, Anthony Maxwell. Editor is Ornolf Thorson. But it's just a saga of the Icelanders. Absolutely. But out of Africa is not debunked. We all started in Africa. What's debunked is that we only left once. We now know that Homo erectus left Africa. And we also know that we left Africa and lived in the Levant for 100,000 years. And then we went back into Africa and back up and back in and back up and back in and back up. But that we didn't leave the Levant period or the Levant area until 50,000 years ago, except for indigenous Australians who have been there for 65 to 70,000 years. So no, out of Africa has not been debunked. A singular exodus from Africa has absolutely been debunked. We know that it was not a singular out of Africa experience, but a multi-lane, multi-direction highway. It's a multi-lane, multi-direction highway out of Africa. We left and we came back, and we left and we came back, and we left and we came back. The Levant area is like Jordan. The very top of the Arabian Peninsula is the Levant area. From the Caucasus Mountains down into North Africa is Levant. But the space, I think that the space, oh fuck, I'd have to look. I just know it's in the Levant, and I'd have to look at I've got the articles up. I'd have to look at the articles to see which exact spaces they are within the Levant. But there's a couple different spaces in the Levant. So, with this knowledge, we know that Europeans were mainly black until a couple thousand years ago. Even after we see Europeans becoming more white than dark, we see that there's a great influx. Currently, we have three graves in Britain during the Viking Age. The first one at 700 of a young girl who's 11 years old who has 33% West African DNA. So one of her parents and a couple sides of her grandparents at that point are West African. She's buried with her aunts who are Central Northern European, which is the other 73% of her DNA. We have two uh, burials of Viking graves that are men who are Black, African. Their DNA is one's West African. Oh, I don't remember what the other one is, but I do remember that it is African. I just don't remember exactly which region. And those are just burials during the Viking period, during the 300 years of the Viking Age, right? And those are three within England in Viking graves. No, I don't think the girl is within a Viking grave. It's just Viking Age. I think the girl is within a Britain grave, Celtic grave. Um, we see that Scandinavia is settled by two groups, one of whom looks like Cheddarmen, dark skinned and light eyed, and the other one is dark of eyed and light of skin. This is the Finno-Ugric language group that descends into the Sami, who are still dark of eye and light of skin. And you see, interestingly, that the group that goes up with the light eyes and the very dark skin is, in fact, the extremely light Northern European that we get today, compared to the one that goes in with dark eyes and light skin, who is actually more of an olive skin tone, like a my skin tone, than the ultra, ultra light of Northern Scandinavia or of Scandinavia that we see today. Which I kind of find really interesting that the darker skin went really, really fucking light, but the light skin seems to pretty much just stay the same, which would also tell you, um, well, okay, so I don't know. To me, that would state that it is because of the fact that you're seeing the Finno-Ugric group coming over from Asia and the Siberian Peninsula and having been up there longer than the group coming up from Europe that is dark of skin of light of eye. And because they've been in that space longer, they've gone to the skin tone that they need for that space before they ever go into Scandinavia. And so by the time they get there, they're what they need to be. And so the group coming in has to adapt, and that adaptation just adapts and adapts and adapts. Hi, Harris. Are you on both? Hi, you are. So I think that that to me is an extremely interesting factor within that. Um, I'm only going for a couple of hours at a time these days, just to kind of keep myself sane. So I'm going to go ahead and take off in a couple here. I'll go ahead and open up again for any questions on any of these things, anything that I didn't cover that you want to know, within reason, because some things I just don't know. And anything that you're questioning about what I said. That's very true, Maverick. So Denisovians' DNA we see in Southeast Asia, Australasia, which is Australian, and the islands in the South Pacific, and in Turtle Islanders. And those are really the only spaces that we see Denisovian DNA. We know that the 0.02 to the 0.03% of Denisovian DNA we see in Turtle Islanders pre-colonization. So these are archaic finds pre-colonization that have been DNA tested and gotten that DNA from, shows that they would have had to mix with the Denisovian for about 10,000 years, which shows that translation across southern Eurasia. We're also seeing that Many of us within the indigenous community, well, not many of us, I have for a long time thought that the southern boat route exists, that Turtle Islanders did not come over across the land bridge, which has been debunked as our main route of travel and our earliest route of travel over here, anyways. But that the Kelp Highway is absolutely a fact, but also that there would be a southern boat route because if you look at the islands in the South Pacific, a southern boat route makes so much sense, so much sense. So with the current information with Denisovian DNA, they are starting to look at a southern boat route because they believe to have the Turtle Island indigenous DNA presence of Denisovian in the DNA. Um, it took 10,000 years, and that because of where Denisovian DNA is found in Eurasia, that they had to have gone southern instead of northern. And so there are currently a couple of very recent articles that have come out showing that they believe the southern boat route happened, which is just cheery for me. I really enjoy it. I will be back Friday AM, 8 a.m. Um, and we will be moving into Neanderthals after this. So our first live for Neanderthals will go for a couple of lives, and it will be a focus on other species that we have found within Neanderthal genomics. Um, some of the mixing patterns of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, a little bit of information on how the DNA is coming into play and how they're figuring that out. And then we're also going to talk about the presence of speech and how we tell the presence of speech in Neanderthals. That will be our first set of lives on Neanderthals. And then our second set of lives on Neanderthals is going to be a set focused on cave art and jewelry within Neanderthals. So I am in Pacific time zone, something like that. I'm on the West Coast of the United States. Um, and so 8 a.m. Pacific on Tuesdays and Fridays, and then 8 p.m. Pacific Standard on Sundays and Wednesdays is my current lives. So my next live will be Friday morning Pacific Standard Time at 8 a.m. I will also I'll be having Art on Rocks is found in Brazil. Carrie Ann, you're absolutely correct. So I sorry, I just completely lost all train of thought. Thank you, Katie. So I will so we will be focusing on Neanderthals starting Friday 8 a.m. That's what I was saying. I'm going to be posting a live event, so there will be a countdown on my page. It will tell you what time it is in your time zone. Um, and so you're just getting in your coffin at 8 a.m. You can turn it on to listen to when you're going to sleep in the coffin. And so I will be here and we will be talking this Friday again about different species in the Neanderthals and language within Neanderthals. That makes, yeah, I can see that, Carrie. I mean, a lot of times that happens, I think. There's that back and forth. I know, like, so my grandmother Emily told my grandmother Emily was my mother's great grandmother, and my mother was great raised by her grandmother Louise. Her mother Pat was not a very good mother. In fairness to Pat, she had her first child at 16. She was silent generation. She had 9 children and 7 lived. And she was in an extremely abusive marriage. So I'm sure most of her children were the product of rape. Um, but when she left her husband, she left my 2-week-old mother with my mother's grandmother. And that's who raised her. And so Emily, my mother's great grandmother, was her favorite. And Emily told my mother stories of her and her childhood. Emily's mother's mother was the child of a slave who had escaped pregnant with her master's child in the 1750s. That translated to my mother as Emily being the daughter of a raped slave. Um, and then Emily's husband, he's indigenous, but it's pretty far back on him. But because he had ran away very early in their marriage, my grandmother Emily translated his indigeneity, but didn't translate anything else to my mother. And so my mother grew up believing that that grandfather was indigenous fully, and that her grandmother Emily was half black and half Dutch. So she passed this information to me. And so I believed this my childhood and went into my adulthood. I believed this until I was 40, 44 actually. So in early, well, not 44, 42. In early 2020, I was talking about this online, and one of my aunts goes, I just did my 23andMe DNA test, and there is no African ancestry on there. So that's a lie. And I went, oh. So I removed all of it and I went and dug, because for me, I could never be Rachel Dolezal. That was just a huge thing to me. I'd grown up learning about Cherokee princesses. I knew exactly what that meant. I was not going to be that person. With everything in me, I could not be that person. And so I went digging. Um, First thing I found that her 23andMe DNA absolutely says that we have Sudanese ancestry. So I'm not sure what the fuck she was thinking, other than her own racism, I'm sure. But if you look at her 23andMe DNA, it absolutely says that we are Sudanese. It says that it's like 4% Sudanese, which would be the great grandmother that it's supposed to be. But you know, I had to go digging. And so I was able to trace everything. I have the birth certificate that names the mother as mulatto. So like, I mean, I can trace it all back and everything. I'm absolutely able to trace the indigenous ancestry, and actually have found it in different lines than we thought it was. But with that, for me, I see that a lot of times we try and ignore the ancestry in a lot of areas. Like, you will find certain family members who are like, yeah, I know it's there, I've been told it's there, grandma said it. And when they do the DNA, it's absolutely there, whereas the other half of the family is like, no, there's no way, we are not possibly. And usually what you find is that it has to do with structural or just personal racism, that there is this fear that there is this heritage that you've been devaluing. Like, if you as a group of people have been devaluing a certain group of people, you don't want to believe that you belong to it, right? So we often seem to find that you got one side of the family going, oh yeah, this is there, absolutely, and the other side of the family going, not even close. And that it is not the side of the family going, not even close, that the DNA proves correct. It is the side of the family that goes, yep, it's there, it's there. Um, so I feel that struggle, I would say, and I would say, just keep going with the pride, right? Yeah, I believe that. I'm like, you can pull up maps of like where your DNA hits on the globe. Um, And I can pull up maps and it's literally like everywhere. Like, there's not a space that I don't have a multiple DNA hits in. And then if I look at like the lineage, like pretty much every, like, I go back to the Bell Beakers in certain spaces, like pretty much everything you can see, like it's everywhere, right? In certain sites you can get into it really in depth and really see. And it I love it. To me, that's one thing I love about myself, is that I'm everything. Because to me, it just means everybody's family. To me, it just means there's not a person out there that I don't have some familial connection to in some way, space, or form, right? Which means that everybody's my cousin, which means that it's my job to teach everybody and love everybody and take care of everybody. And it means that I belong to everybody, right? And for somebody who spent their life dancing backwards and has never belonged, that's kind of really important to me too. But yeah, we're all related. We're all one, you know. Even if you're not talking on the molecular level, and you're just looking at the genetic level, we all trace our DNA back to, even when we look at things like, hey, subtle, even when we look at things like there's seven mitochondrial Eves, what they mean is that as a mitochondrial DNA traces back to the foundation of the branch, you get a mitochondrial Eve. But that mitochondrial Eve still traces back to the original mitochondrial Eve, right? Still has that genetics that goes back to that original. And so we really all have the same grandmothers, right? Uh, So the best GNA test is going to run you 300 bucks. The cheapest that I have found that does a whole genomic is the Nebula one. It's in the bottom of my link tree. Um, but it's the only genomic I've found that's less than 700 to $1,000. Yeah, I have, and that was a surprise for me. I have India and I have Romani. Those were the two that were very surprising for me. Um, I wasn't surprised so much by the Sami because I had already known of the Finn. And being in the same area, it kind of makes a lot of sense for me. But the Romani and the India and East Asia, I have East Asia as well. And for those, I was really like, I had not had an idea of those before. Well, I haven't heard of ADH theory as ADHD likely being the hunter gatherers of our communities. Um, I would think that we're the thinkers. That's what I would say is that I think that when we look at things like ADHD and ADD, what we're looking at people who, okay, so ADD is a hyper focus. ADHD is a multi focus, right? And so that hyper focus gives the ability to create new inventions, but that multi focus gives the ability to create new inventions too, because that multi focus gives you the ability to start at this thought and end 3,000 miles away at another thought, right? Because that's what that multi focus does. Every single scroll takes you into a new thought, but every single thought that's a new squirrel is based on the prior one. So you can make leaps and bounds and you couldn't before, right? So I would think that ADHD and ADD and autism would be the scholarly groups, would be the ones who are creating those new thought processes, would be the first people doing art, would be the first people doing writing. And I think that that really plays out when we look at things like our early scholars are often thought of as being weird, right? Like everybody's like that wizard in the corner that really doesn't like people and is all hermity, right? Those are early scholars, which really lines up with ADD and ADHD to me, right? And that makes sense, chicken fried. And I'm not saying I do see where that aspect makes sense. It's just to me that I think that we be more scholarly and the ones thinking of the newer leaps, the flint nappers, the first person to sew clothing, the first person to think of fire. Weird people are the coolest. Oh, I bet they are, Katie. I don't know. I haven't tried it. Um, and we did drug the shit out of everybody. We are cousins, Carrie. Okay, so I am going to take off again. Friday morning, Pacific Standard Time at 8 p.m. For your knowledge, it is almost 10 p.m. my time. So 8 a.m. Did I say p.m.? I probably said p.m. 8 a.m. Friday morning, Pacific Standard Time. And as soon as I end this live, I will on TikTok. I can't on YouTube because I can't figure out how to go live after I do it on YouTube. Like, it lets me do the live thing, but I can't go live from the live thing, so it just sits there. Um, but I will put up a live event, so you do know when the next one is, so you have that in advance as soon as I'm done with this live tonight. This is not my final live, it's just my final live on these subjects. We will be moving into Neanderthals next, and we are going to spend several weeks in Neanderthals. The first focus that we're going to do is the different species and the DNA stuff and all the different DNA things we're finding right now. And then the second thing that we're going to be studying on Friday is going to be speech capacity with the Neanderthal. And then we'll be moving into cave paintings and jewelry for the next week. Everybody have a great one. Oh, hold on. Hold on. Absolutely Discord. Or sorry, absolutely subtle. Yeah, it is early for me too. Sorry, guys. But it's easiest because I'm trying to make sure that I'm on for European as well, for Euro time zone as well. I used to be able to split my focus effectively. I can't anymore. See you on Friday. See you on Friday. I'm waiting to see what Subtle needs. I think Subtle is putting something in chat. I do have a Discord. Um, I'll put up a new link on the Discord for the link tree in my Bible. Fuck off. I've been waking up at 7 a.m. since 2015. I've had a couple of months where I've been able to pull it differently, but I can go to bed at 5 o'clock in the morning and wake up at 7 a.m. since 2015. 7:15 is the latest I can sleep. So it really doesn't matter when I go to bed. Okay, yeah, Subtle is I have I have a channel, but Subtle is also setting up a channel through their server as well so that we can have them both up and so that people can get a hold of us or so people can get a hold of me. I am also starting next week, hopefully. Might take an extra week just because of the extra work. I will put out my first publication. This is just going to be a brief, like chapter long theory on the right to life and what the right to life should entail. And so I will, okay, subtle. So I will be publishing my first piece through Amazon so that it's free for everybody. Uh, Hopefully within the next week and a half. I have it written. I'm trying to figure out how much of it I need to rewrite, and I'm trying to edit through it. And I've got a couple people helping me through it. But this will be my first piece. This will be political. I try not to get political here mainly because I don't want to get live banned. But this will be political. In DM in here, I think so, but I don't think I can do it while I'm talking. Oh yeah, I'll definitely read it out and audible it because I use Audible. I don't know if I can while I'm talking, subtle. Oh, and I can't get it. I will. I can't do it right now, subtle. I'll do it on Discord because I know I have you over there. Yeah, okay, perfect. I'll do it over on Discord and get it in there. But those will be for free. I don't know what I'll probably do is I'll probably do them for free for the first 1,000, and then I'll put them for like $5 or $1 or something like that, so people can read them. But so there's something coming out of it. Um, but hey, Kenny, but I will be doing that. Hopefully 2 weeks on the outside. Like I said, it's already written up. I'm just trying to re-edit it and make sure everything is exactly how I want. I feel it's pedantic, and I want people to look through it and make sure that it's not pedantic and I don't sound pedantic before I publish it. Uh, but I will be doing that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a publish of chapters. So they will just be every couple of weeks. I will be doing a chapter, just a few pages long, that I'm publishing because people have been asking for different ways to uh, different information and different ways to gain that information. And so, but my first one will be right to life. And then I will be working on the other rights. And I hesitate to say it is my manifesto because I don't want anybody to think I'm going to go shoot anybody up. I'm not postal. But it is a belief. It is a thought process of where we should be at. Have a great one, everybody. Love you much. I will see you Friday morning at 8 o'clock. Have a great one, everybody, on YouTube as well. Again, Friday morning at 8 o'clock, I will be setting up the live alert on here as soon as I'm done with this live tonight. May you guys all have a blessed day.